settle in and let your thoughts grow quiet as we open a gentle reading from Captain Cook's journal during his first voyage round the world. To set the scene, we begin with a calm sketch of the man himself, so that his courage and character may rise softly before the mind. If you enjoy this, please like and subscribe. It helps us immensely and allows us to continue sharing peaceful bedtime history. The life of Captain Cook has been often told, and here we share only what helps you feel his path and spirit. Early writers painted his portrait with care, and from them we gather a clear, respectful view. Though many private details are lost, enough remains to place our hero quietly before us. Let us drift into his beginnings. James Cook rose from very humble ranks. He was the second son of James Cook, a Yorkshire labourer, and Grace his wife. He was born on the edge of the Cleveland Hills on February 27, 1728, in the village of Marton, a few miles from Middlesbrough, and within sight of the landmark hill called Rosebery Topping. When he was 8, his family moved to Great Ayton, beneath that same steadfast hill. As a boy, he had some simple schooling at Marton and Great Ayton. At 13, he was apprenticed to Sanderson, a draper and grocer in the fishing village of Staithes on the coast. After a year, the call of the sea grew strong, and he went to Whitby and shipped on the collier Freelove, a vessel of the brothers Walker. In that hard school, he learned the seaman's life. There he trained his hands and mind for duties that would one day be great. Storms in the North Sea, poor food, and cramped quarters taught him patience and endurance. He learned to face hardship with quiet steadiness and to persist where others might turn back. In these years, the sea shaped him. Of his 13 years in the merchant service, the details have faded. What voyages he made and how he fared are not recorded. One clear moment stands forth. Yet one clear moment stands forth. In May of 1755, at the age of 27, while mate of a Walker vessel in the Thames, he volunteered for service in His Majesty's ship Eagle, a 60-gun ship of war. The press for sailors was active with the outbreak of war against France, and he chose his course. Captain Hugh Palliser, who soon took command of the Eagle, became Cook's warm patron. It seems Cook did work beyond that of an able seaman, and the ship took part in the taking of Louisbourg and other actions on the North American and West Indian station. In 1759, the Eagle returned to England. By the aid of Palliser, Cook was appointed master of the Mercury, a sign that his skill as a navigator was already well seen. The Mercury sailed to North America, and there Cook performed his first recorded good service. He took soundings in the St. Lawrence to guide the fleet that covered the army under Wolfe before Quebec, placing ships in safety under the eyes of the enemy, much of the work done by night. Soon he was set to survey the intricate channels below Quebec, and for many years his chart guided mariners along that river. Thus his gift as a surveyor began to shine. Before his time, charts were often crude. Cook had somehow gathered sound knowledge of trigonometry and the knack of applying it with calm judgment. In doing so, he helped to shape the art of modern marine surveying. When the Quebec expedition was over, he became master of the Northumberland, bearing the flag of Admiral Lord Colville, and during the winter at Halifax, he turned again to study, deepening his understanding of mathematics and astronomy. When the Quebec expedition was over, he became master of the Northumberland, bearing the flag of Admiral Lord Colville, and during the winter at Halifax, he turned again to study, deepening his understanding of mathematics and astronomy. And so, step by careful step, the course of his life was laid out upon the wide sea, with patience as his compass and steady work as his star. In 1762, the Northumberland lay at Newfoundland during the capture of that island from the French, and Cook was again employed in surveys. His careful work drew the eye of Captain Graves, the governor, who formed a high opinion of his abilities. In the quiet months that followed, Cook returned to England and married Elizabeth Batts, daughter of a man in business at Wapping. Soon he was called once more by Captain Graves to go back to Newfoundland and make marine surveys. In this important duty he continued until 1767, and when Captain Palliser succeeded Graves as governor, he gladly relied on Cook's skill. The charts Cook drew in the schooner Grenville were admirable, clear and steady in their truth. The best proof of their worth is that they have not been wholly replaced even by the more detailed surveys of modern times. Like all first charts of a little-known shore, and especially a shore full of rocks and shoals, and deeply indented by bays and creeks, they had omissions. Yet when one considers the wide extent of coast, the fogs and hard weather of that region, and that Cook had at most only one assistant, their accuracy astonishes. The originals are now among the most treasured possessions of the Hydrographic Office of the Admiralty. With these foundations laid, we approach the crowning achievements of Cook's life. After many years of neglect, the exploration of the Pacific began to stir new interest. After many years of neglect, the exploration of the Pacific began to stir new interest. This great ocean, which few even now fully realize covers nearly half the surface of the globe, had been crossed by many vessels since the voyage of Magellan. Still, very little was known of the islands scattered through its central expanse. There were reasons for this uncertainty. The islands occupied a small portion of that vast water, and most voyagers followed Magellan's track. Others, sailing from Central America, aimed straight for the Ladrone Islands, Magellan's discovery. Few set out for exploration alone, and even those who began with that noble aim found that prudence urged them to make for a sure place of refreshment within a given time. Their provisions were poor at the start, and worse after they had battled through the Straits of Magellan. Their water was limited and could not last beyond a narrow span of days. Each long voyage tells the same quiet tale, short of water, and scanning the sea for a chance to fill the casks. The winds were thought to blow in fixed paths, and each captain feared to leave the known fair wind routes and risk delay. Above all, there hung the dread of scurvy. Every expedition suffered, each hoped to be spared, and each in turn grew weak beneath its touch. For the leader of any long venture, the constant question was how to avert this paralyzing influence, and one after another had to admit defeat. It grows harder for us now to imagine these burdens. The prevailing winds and currents are charted, and the distance and bearing from point to point are set down with precision. The prevailing winds and currents are charted, and the distance and bearing from point to point are set down with precision. Steam carries us across calm waters, and often over an entire voyage at a pace little less than that of travel by rail on land. Modern science preserves fresh and wholesome food far beyond the old limits, and many of the dangers of the sea have fallen away. Consider time alone. In the 18th century, a ship might average no more than 50 miles a day. A full-powered steamer today may cover 400, and a well-fitted sailing ship not less than 150. Yet in Cook's time, and especially upon the unknown Pacific, every hindrance pressed the explorers toward a common track. Even so, amid the winds and long swells, a few did venture to leave that beaten path. In the latter part of the 16th century, the Spaniards Mendana, Quiros, and Torres, sailing from their colonies in Peru, ventured along the central line of the Pacific. They found the Marquesas, certain small coral islands, the northern New Hebrides, and the Solomon Islands. Yet their voyages were kept so secret, for fear of Drake and those who followed him, that few could tell where these islands truly lay. In 1642, Abel Tasman came across the Indian Ocean from the west. He touched at Tasmania, which he named Van Diemen's Land. skirted the western coast of the North Island of New Zealand without landing, then stretched away to the northeast and found the Tonga group. His track hinted at great spaces still unknown. The English buccaneers were not among these discoverers. Dampier, Woodes Rogers, and others sailed from Acapulco to the Ladrones, watching for the rich Spanish galleons from Manila, and they added little to the knowledge of the Pacific and its secrets. Dampier, Woodes Rogers, and others sailed from Acapulco to the Ladrones, watching for the rich Spanish galleons from Manila, and they added little to the knowledge of the Pacific and its secrets. Small wonder, then, that the imagination of geographers ran free across the blank places on their globes. They saw that the northern hemisphere held much land, while the southern showed water or empty space, beginning with the unsteady idea that the lands of north and south should balance. They believed there must be a great continent in the southern Pacific to make up the lack. They named it Terra Australis Incognita, and many an ancient chart drew it boldly around the South Pole. Some held that Tasman had touched it in New Zealand. Others said that Quiros had seen it near his island of Encarnacion, and again at Espiritu Santo in the New Hebrides. Yet none had gone to make sure, and the sea kept its counsel. During the reign of George III, the wish to know more of this wide and silent ocean grew strong in England. The king took keen interest, and for the first time since the days of Queen Elizabeth, when Davis, Frobisher, Drake, Narborough, and other seamen went out on voyages of discovery, the quest was renewed. Fresh keels were laid toward the unknown. In 1764, the Dolphin and the Tamar, under Commodore Byron and Captain Muat, sailed to go round the world. They spent a while exploring the Falkland Islands, and after a 2 months' passage through the Strait of Magellan, they stood across the Pacific. They kept near the well-trodden track, passed north of the Paumotus, where they sighted a few small islands, and again made for the Ladrones. They kept near the well-trodden track, passed north of the Paumotus, where they sighted a few small islands, and again made for the Ladrones. As so often then, they suffered sorely from scurvy, and longed only to reach some known haven to recover. Byron returned in May 1766, having added little to the world's store of Pacific knowledge, and the Dolphin was sent once more in August of the same year, with the Swallow under Captains Wallace and Carteret. These did somewhat better, though first they had to fight through the long and narrow strait with its steady contrary winds, a struggle of 4 months before they gained the open Pacific. As they passed out, they separated, the Dolphin outsailing the Swallow, and a calm reader may think the senior officers parted company when there was no need. The Dolphin kept a little south of the usual route, fell in with some islands of the Paumotu group, and at last came upon Tahiti. She anchored in Royal Bay after touching a reef at the entrance, her people already thinned by scurvy, and found both peril and promise at hand. The first meeting brought an attack from the shore, yet the reply was so firm that peace quickly followed, and a close friendship grew. Through the rest of the month, the intercourse was friendly, and the ship sailed away with a high opinion of Tahiti and the Tahitians. The Queen, known to cook as Oberea, was especially well disposed toward them. Their talk with the islanders remained limited, for the stay was too brief to learn the language, and so the voyage yielded little on the ways of the people. Once at sea again, the old tale returned: sickness, thirst, and doubts ahead. Once at sea again, the old tale returned: sickness, thirst, and doubts ahead. After passing several small islands, and after a failed attempt to water at one of them, they once more set their course for the Ladrones. With this turn of the wake upon the water, we come back to Wallace and the next stage of his account. He weighed the matter with care. Watering here would be slow and weary work in the depth of the southern winter. The ship was leaky, the rudder shook in the stern, and hidden harm below the waterline could not be known. He judged her unfit for the rough weather off Cape Horn or in the Strait of Magellan. Even if she passed the strait or the cape, she must then find a port for refreshment, and none lay within easy reach. So he resolved to make way for Tinian, then Batavia, and onward to Europe by the Cape of Good Hope. By that route they might reach home sooner, and if the ship failed later, they would still likely save their lives in calmer seas on the run toward Batavia. Thus his course was set with prudence more than daring, and the wake that followed told of care rather than conquest. Others would choose otherwise. The voyages led by Cook were marked by resolve that the main design should not be turned aside. There was resource in every strain and every danger, and a steady will to press on. Where one captain thought only of return, another sought the work ahead, and the sea remembered the difference. Wallace kept nearly to the path of Byron. He passed from the Ladrones through the China Sea to Batavia, and then home. He came to his moorings in May of 1768, the voyage complete, and the log closed with quiet brevity. Yet the Swallow under Captain Carteret moved in another spirit. Yet the Swallow under Captain Carteret moved in another spirit. The ship was poorly fitted for so long a passage, and had no forge, while the goods for trade had been left with the Dolphin. Still, Carteret did not bend to doubt, and when he found himself alone, he chose to carry on. From the Strait of Magellan he touched at Juan Fernandez, steering somewhat south of the line taken by Wallace. He passed below Tahiti and discovered Pitcairn Island, with other isles lying south of the Paumotus. By then his people suffered sorely from scurvy, and the ship was in a sorry state. Carteret sought only a place of refreshment to regain strength, then hoped to press south in search of the great southern continent. Fortune did not favor him. Missing all other havens, he came upon the Santa Cruz group, and believed his want might be met there. He anchored and set about watering, but the shore turned hostile, and his party was attacked. Several men, including the master, were wounded and later fell from poisoned arrows, and the hope of a quiet refit faded like a breeze at dusk. With the company of the ship in misery, with no forge and no tools to mend all that needed care, and with the captain himself very ill, he gave up the thought of southern exploration. He took what water he could and stood on toward the Solomon Islands. These he missed as well, but he fell in with New Britain, and passing between it and New Ireland, he showed that these two large lands were not one. There he did what he could to ease the strain upon the hull, heeling and caulking her as the sea permitted. The crew found little more than fruit to ease their scurvy and were pressed by fierce islanders. The crew found little more than fruit to ease their scurvy and were pressed by fierce islanders. He longed to examine the shores more fully, but the state of the ship and the temper of the people would not allow it. So they labored on by Mindanao to Macassar and Celebes, hindered by contrary winds and disappointed at every turn in their search for refreshment. Men were lost to scurvy, and hope thinned like the moon. At Macassar, the Dutch gave them an inhospitable welcome and denied supplies, and after many weeks at Bonthan awaiting the change of the monsoon, they set out once more. In time they reached Batavia in June 1768, the one port in the Dutch Indies truly open to ships. There they hove the vessel down and made a thorough repair, and the crew found rest at last. Thence they shaped a course by the Cape and came home on the 20th of March, 1769. The long circle of the sea gently closed. Of all the voyages before Cook, Carteret showed the most determination and a true spirit of enterprise. Had his ship been better supplied and better suited to the long demands of such a cruise, he would, but for one thing, have accomplished far more. This was the fatal disease that no captain had yet succeeded in warding off, which hampered and defeated the efforts of the most enthusiastic. No man could go beyond a certain point in disregarding the health of his crew. So the English people grew used to voyages with scanty fruits, and they did not encourage repetition. In all the years since the Spaniards first sailed the Pacific, little real knowledge of its lands had been gained. Let us linger a moment and picture what was known before we drift toward what still lay hidden. Let us linger a moment and picture what was known before we drift toward what still lay hidden. The Marquesas and the Santa Cruz group were known to exist, but grave doubts were felt about the Solomons, for no one but Mendana had seen them, and maps set them in very different longitudes. Several voyagers had sighted members of the wide Paumotu group, yet the varying positions caused great confusion. Tahiti had been found by Wallace. Tasman had laid down the south point of Tasmania, the western coast of the North Island of New Zealand, and the Tonga Islands. Dampier and Carteret showed that New Britain and New Ireland were separate islands, lying to the northeast of New Guinea. Couros had found the northern island of the New Hebrides. Yet of none of these lands was anything truly known, for those who visited them had merely touched and passed on. They had not gone around them or learned their limits, and their brief descriptions were bald and often exaggerated. Now let us turn to what remained unknown, for here the chart was pale and wide. The whole east coast of Australia, or New Holland, and whether it was joined to Tasmania on the south and to New Guinea on the north, the true dimensions of New Zealand, and the place of New Caledonia and the New Hebrides, except only the northern island, the Fiji Islands and the Sandwich Islands, the Phoenix, Union, Ellice, Gilbert, and Marshall groups, and innumerable small islands scattered here and there. So too the Cook Islands, and all the Society Islands except Tahiti, waited in silence upon the sea. The greater part of the Paumotu group remained uncertain. The greater part of the Paumotu group remained uncertain. North of 45 degrees north, the coast of North America was unknown, and there still lingered the great, undefined, and imaginary southern continent to be disproved. The map invited courage, and the ocean waited. Whether other voyages would have been undertaken one cannot say, but in 1768 the Royal Society spoke with purpose. A transit of Venus across the disk of the Sun would occur in 1769, and astronomers were eager to take advantage. The aim was to learn the distance of the Earth from the Sun, the baseline of all astronomical measurements, then very imperfectly known. The Central Pacific offered a favorable position, and the Royal Society memorialized the king to send a ship. The request was granted, and at first Alexander Dalrymple, who had conducted marine surveys in the East Indies and was known as a scientific geographer, was chosen as observer. It was found, however, that he expected to command the ship as well, and the Admiralty would have nothing to do with that. After some discussion, James Cook was selected. This speaks volumes for the reputation of Cook at that time. To have risen absolutely from the ranks was much, but to be chosen as a master to command a ship and to undertake an observation of such importance was most exceptional, and it reflects well on the judgment of those who chose him. It seems that Mr. Stevens, Secretary to the Admiralty, had much to do with it. How Stevens became acquainted with Cook history does not relate, but his winter visits to the Admiralty to complete his charts of Newfoundland likely brought them together, and the Secretary formed a high opinion of him. How Stevens became acquainted with Cook history does not relate, but his winter visits to the Admiralty to complete his charts of Newfoundland likely brought them together, and the Secretary formed a high opinion of him. Cook, we may be sure, accepted with glad resolve, and his pride must have been great when he learned he would receive a commission as lieutenant. This in itself was a most unusual step, It was rare for a master to be moved into the executive line of the Royal Navy, and many an admiral had vainly used influence for deserving officers. Now a door had opened, and the wide Pacific waited beyond. In those days the training of a master was seldom fitted for success in command of ships or men, yet here the exception was well earned. Cook was allowed to choose his vessel, and mindful of shoals in unknown seas, he turned to the stout and full-bottomed colliers of the North Sea. He chose a Whitby-built ship of 370 tons, named H.M. Bark Endeavour. She was brought to the yard at Deptford to be fitted out with care and patience. Her look was unlike that of a man of war, and this would later cause uneasiness at Rio de Janeiro, where a merchant-shaped hull with officers in uniform and guns on board stirred the suspicions of the Portuguese viceroy. It is not clearly set down whether her bottom was coppered, and Cook later spoke against that method. The records speak of heeling and of boot topping, the cleaning and greasing of the hull just below the waterline, which points to wooden sheathing. In any case, she proved a most suitable vessel for the work ahead. The log notes that she was a little crank, yet a brave and steady seaboat. The log notes that she was a little crank, yet a brave and steady seaboat. Her sailing was slow, as her build foretold, but her strength and flat floor served her well when she felt the grip of a coral reef. She carried 10 small carriage guns and 12 swivels, enough to overawe, but not to invite battle. So fitted, she waited upon her company. Mr. Banks, a man of science and means, later known as Sir Joseph Banks, offered himself for the voyage and brought a staff of artists and helpers. He persuaded Dr. Solander, a Swedish naturalist who would later serve at the British Museum, to join him. Mr. Charles Green from the Royal Observatory at Greenwich was sent as astronomer. Their presence gave the expedition a breadth and depth beyond seamanship alone. Banks and Solander, both keen observers, gathered the plants and creatures of new lands and marked the customs of the people they met, in ways for which Cook had neither time nor training. Though the journal of Banks has never been published and cannot now be traced, Dr. Hawkesworth drew many fair remarks from it. These helped to make the tale of the voyage more complete for those at home. Thus science and navigation moved together, each aiding the other with quiet purpose. Mr. Green deserves a special word, for a great question of that day troubled all who sailed far. How to find longitude with speed and certainty was the missing art, and without it half the worth of discovery was lost. The best known method then was by lunars, the careful measuring of the angular distance between the moon and the sun, or the moon and a star. From such measures, taken with exactness, a path to longitude could be found. From such measures, taken with exactness, a path to longitude could be found. The moon's motion is swift, so the measured distance shifts from second to second, and astronomers can reckon the time at Greenwich, when that distance will be a set number of degrees. By familiar calculations, the local time at the ship can be found. If the observation and the reckoning are made in the same moment, the difference between local time and Greenwich time yields the longitude. It is a clean idea, and yet a demanding art at sea. In truth, both the seeing and the ciphering were hard, and the tables then in use made the work heavy. Few sailors had the skill or the patience, and the results were often not exact enough for safety. The moon's motions are many and subtle, so a small error in her computed place could swell into a large error in time, and so in longitude. Happily, the nautical almanac had just begun to appear, bringing better lunar tables and easing the labor of the reckoning. The great invention of the chronometer, a watch that could keep steady time for long periods, had by then been completed by Harrison, yet few had been made, and both astronomers and sailors were slow to trust this new way of carrying time at sea. So Cook received no chronometer. Green had sailed with Mr. Maskelyne to Barbados in His Majesty's ship Princess Louisa in the year 1763 to test Harrison's timekeeper, and a complicated chair intended for observations of the satellites of Jupiter on board. Though that trial had shown the strength of the new method, the Endeavour still went without such a watch, and so lunars became the mainstay of the voyage. In these observations, Green was tireless. Cook, an excellent observer, often joined him, yet it was Green whose business it chiefly was, and to him belong most of the carefully determined longitudes that make the voyage so remarkable. Green's log, which still exists, is filled with lunar observations, and the harmony among repeated measures shows the care with which they were made. While we admire Cook's knowledge and zeal in every detail, the original papers make clear that without Green, many chances to secure longitude would have been lost, for Cook had little time to spare. Let us give honor to whom honor is due. Not all final results were equally good, but this was due to errors already mentioned in the moon's place in the almanac, which changed with her position and so altered the resulting longitude. The wonder is not that some longitudes are far from the mark, but that so many came so near the truth. It was careful work done under sail, by eye and hand, and the sky an ever-changing page. The Endeavour left the Thames on June 30th, 1768. She lay in Plymouth Sound from July 14 to the 26th, and then sailed at last with Banks and the scientific staff now on board. She carried a company of 94 souls in a very close stowage, a small floating world set for a long road. A full list of all hands was placed before the journal when the ship sailed from Plymouth. Her draft was 13 feet 6 inches, and her provisions were laid in to last 18 months. At first, the transit of Venus was to be observed at the Marquesas, but the Dolphin returned before Cook sailed with news of Tahiti and its friendly people, and so that island was chosen instead. The exact words of Cook's orders cannot now be given. They were secret. The covering letter, dated July 30th, 1768, stands in the Admiralty records, yet the orders that should follow in the book are missing and have never been published. Even so, their intent can be known. Cook later wrote that he was to go straight to Tahiti, and then to carry on the work of discovery in the Pacific by sailing south to the latitude of 40 degrees. If he found no land, he was to continue west until he met New Zealand, which he was to explore, and then return to England by the way he judged best. Care against the scourge of scurvy had not been forgotten. Along with all the remedies then known, a special letter directed Cook to take malt to sea and to make from it a daily wort, as recommended by Dr. M.C. Bride. The malt was to be ground under the surgeon's direction and turned into fresh wort each day. 1 quart of ground malt was to be mixed with 3 quarts of boiling water, well stirred and kept closely covered for 3 or 4 hours, after which the liquor was strained. Then the wort was to be boiled into a gentle panada with sea biscuit, or with the dried fruits the ship carried. The method continued in the same simple manner, suited to a small galley and the needs of a crew far from home. So the remedy was prepared, day by day, against the long blue distance ahead. The patient was to make at least 2 meals a day of the soothing panada, and to drink a quart or more of the fresh infusion, as strength permitted, within each day. The surgeon was to keep an exact account of its effects, a quiet ledger of care and outcome. It may anticipate the tale a little, yet it suits the flow to tell here how these efforts fared against the once unconquerable enemy. It may anticipate the tale a little, yet it suits the flow to tell here how these efforts fared against the once unconquerable enemy. Mr. Perry reported that sauerkraut, mustard, vinegar, wheat, inspissated orange and lemon juices, salop, portable soup, sugar, molasses, and vegetables, when they could be got, were used, some constantly, and others as chance allowed. These proved of such great service in preserving the people from a scorbutic taint that the use of malt became almost needless. Cold bathing was encouraged. An example made it common, while the allowance of salt beef and pork was reduced from near the beginning. The sailors' usual habit of mixing salt beef fat with their flour and other victuals was strictly forbidden, a small restraint with great reward. Upon leaving England, the issue of butter and cheese was stopped, and raisins were served with the flour instead of pickled suet. At Tierra del Fuego, wild celery was gathered, and each morning breakfast was made with that herb, with ground wheat and portable soup. Cape Horn was passed, and all the men were as free from scurvy as when they sailed from Plymouth. Before reaching Otaheite, 3 slight scorbutic cases appeared. Wort was administered with good effect, and the symptoms quietly faded. No other cases occurred during the voyage, and wort was served at sea as a regular article of diet. No chance was lost of gathering wild celery or any wholesome herb that offered itself upon strange shores. Personal washing was pressed upon all, and the deck for the men was scrubbed more constantly than had been usual, a steady polish of health and habit. Personal washing was pressed upon all, and the deck for the men was scrubbed more constantly than had been usual, a steady polish of health and habit. Stoves were used to dry the decks below, even in warm weather, and the ship breathed a clean and wholesome air. As the voyage is the heart of this tale, its events may be lightly touched in their turn. After calling at Madeira, where the log noted that the Endeavour was fired upon by the fort on the Loo Rock through a misapprehension while shifting berth, and then at Rio de Janeiro, Cook stood on to double Cape Horn. Earlier navigators had struggled through the Strait of Magellan, losing time and wearing out their men with perpetual anchoring and weighing. The narrow waters vexed by foul and stubborn winds. They had hoped to avoid the heavy seas and gales of the open ocean, yet Cook chose the wide way, and his quicker passage, without peril, proved his judgment sound. He discovered several low coral atolls of the Paumotu group, and reached Tahiti on April 13, 1769, the transit of Venus having been observed under fair conditions on June 1. He sailed again on July 13th, exploring and mapping the Society Islands to the westward, lands not before visited. Then he turned to the southward with a quiet resolve, still tracing the broad geometry of the sea. It may be noted that only in recent times have his charts of the Society group been replaced by more elaborate French surveys. Cook pressed on to 40 degrees south, and on the way he discovered one of the Austral group. Finding no sign of the hypothetical southern continent, and meeting very dirty weather, he gained a more northern latitude for better winds, and then steered for New Zealand. Finding no sign of the hypothetical southern continent, and meeting very dirty weather, he gained a more northern latitude for better winds, and then steered for New Zealand. On October 7th he reached Poverty Bay, and during the next 6 months he circumnavigated and mapped the 2 islands completely. In those long months, the lines on his charts grew sure and clean, with patience guiding the pen. At Tahiti he had received on board a native named Tupia, once the high priest, a man of much intelligence and steady presence. To the astonishment and delight of the company, the languages proved near enough that he could act as an interpreter of rare skill. Through him, they gained knowledge, and with his words, a bridge was raised to the New Zealanders, so that meetings became friendlier, and minds could touch across the surf. His counsel steadied more than one uncertain hour. With this good order on board, and the crew in firm health, Cook resolved to explore the unknown east coast of New Holland. There was no need to hurry to a civilized port. as others had been forced to do. Time, for once, was a companion rather than a pursuer, and the wide Pacific opened its calm blue road before them. He reached the southeast point of Australia and traced the long shore to the north, setting it down upon his chart with patient care. Near the far northern end, the voyage almost ended, for the ship touched a coral reef 20 miles from land and held fast. The seamanship of Cook met the danger with steady hands. They got her off, sorely hurt and leaking hard, and carried her into a little port they discovered close by. They got her off, sorely hurt and leaking hard, and carried her into a little port they discovered close by. There they cleared her and laid her on the ground, where the tides left enough of her bottom dry for the carpenters to work. The wisdom of Cook in choosing a vessel of the build of the Endeavour now stood out clear. Not every ship could be beached in such fashion without fear of falling over. After a long delay, she went on again, and soon a second narrow escape awaited her. A vast line of coral reefs fronts the northern part of eastern Australia for 1,200 miles, and it draws near the coast in the very place where the ship had grounded. The water between the outer reef and the land is full of shoals, and his way grew slow and perilous. Fearing a second mishap, Cook at last found a channel toward the open sea and gained the safety of the wide ocean. Yet he was resolved to follow the land he was exploring, and to answer the great question whether Australia was joined to New Guinea or no. 3 days after his escape from the reef, he found himself, in a light wind, embayed on the outside, the breakers close at hand, the ship drifting toward them, while the great swell burst mountains high upon their edge. Once more, calmness and prompt action saved them, and the ship was urged through a narrow opening into the smooth, though reef-dotted, waters within. It was a moment told again and again, dramatic and yet without any strain of exaggeration. With caution born of these fresh dangers, Cook felt his way through the maze in a track that none have followed since, and so reached the northern point of Australia. With caution born of these fresh dangers, Cook felt his way through the maze in a track that none have followed since, and so reached the northern point of Australia. There he won his reward, for he found the channel now called Torres Strait, which led him between New Guinea and Australia. Thus far, the spirit of adventure in his company had kept pace with his own. Now it began to fail. Having secured a direct road to Batavia, and with a little provision still in store, he longed to do more for discovery and stood over toward the little-known shore of New Guinea. It is plain from the words of Cook, though he does not complain, that his people were weary and longing for fresh food and the touch of settled life. Australia had yielded them only a few fish and some turtle, and little else. The salted fare of that time was harsh and hard to eat, and the weight of long labor on scant food was telling on them. They had been over 2 years from England, with no news at all from the outer world, though still they were free from scurvy. After one landing in New Guinea, Cook turned with reluctance toward Batavia. The murmurs grew louder as he passed Timor without seeking to communicate. Soon they made the island of Savu, and there he yielded to their pleading and touched for refreshment. From that point, he held along the south shore of the chain of islands to Sunda Strait, and so to Batavia. Up to this time all had gone well. It was by far the most successful voyage yet made, for much had been done, and even the old foe of seamen, scurvy, had been held at bay. But good fortune would not remain. It was needful to stay at Batavia while the rough repairs were made good in the Dutch dockyard. 2 months and a half in that sickly climate, at an ill-chosen season, wrought a heavy change among the crew. The haven they had desired proved the door of the grave for many. Cook sailed for England on December 27, 1770, with dysentery spread through the ship. The surgeon had already died, and with him the Tahitian Tupia, 2 seamen, and one of the artists of Mr. Banks. Worse was still to come. Day by day the ship pressed slowly over the Indian Ocean toward the Cape, working against the wet and unhealthy northwest monsoon, and the sick list grew longer. Man after man succumbed, and before half the distance to Cape Town was traversed, 22 more were carried off. Green the astronomer, 2 of Banks' staff, 2 midshipmen, the boatswain, and the carpenter were among the number. The crew was more than decimated, and the decks seemed quieter with each sunrise. At last they touched at the Cape, and with war against France expected, the Endeavour joined the East India convoy under HMS Portland at St. Helena. Yet when the ships crossed the line and stood on a wind, the heavy sailing collier-built craft could not keep up, and once more she found herself alone upon her way. After leaving the Cape, 2 more officers, the First Lieutenant Mr. Hicks and the Master Mr. Molina, died, though not of dysentery. Even so, the ship held on and reached England on June 12, 1771. Of the 94 who had sailed from England in the Endeavour, 54 returned. 38 died on the voyage, and of these, 31 after reaching Batavia, most from fever and dysentery contracted there. 38 died on the voyage, and of these, 31 after reaching Batavia, most from fever and dysentery contracted there. After paying off in August 1771, the Endeavour was sold in 1775, and for many years sailed the North Sea as a collier. Yet the voyage had stirred the spirit of discovery anew, and minds soon turned to renewing it under the same heaven-born leader. Cook was given little leisure. Almost at once it was decided that he should go out again, and on November 28, 1771, he was appointed to command the Resolution, while the authorities considered what ships should be employed. Cook's experience with the Endeavour led him to uphold vessels of the same class, for there were to be 2 ships, the Resolution and the Adventure, of 462 and 336 tons, both Whitby-built colliers, were bought, and Cook was promoted to commander, with Tobias Furneaux in the Adventure placed under him. It had been intended that Banks would again accompany the voyage, and to better house his party, a poop was added to the Resolution. But the short run from Deptford to Sheerness showed that the ship was dangerously overweighted. The poop was removed, and in consequence Banks did not sail. Preparations lengthened into 1772, and the ships at last departed, leaving Sheerness on June 22nd and Plymouth on July 13th. There were able hands and keen minds aboard. The naturalists were the 2 Forsters, Germans, father and son. Mr. Wales sailed as astronomer in the Resolution, and Mr. Bailey in the Adventure. 2 of Cook's former companions returned as lieutenants, clerk and Pickersgill, joined by other endeavours among the junior officers, a mark of the confidence he inspired. The great object of the expedition was the settlement of the southern continent. The great object of the expedition was the settlement of the southern continent. Cook was directed to explore the whole region about the South Pole, starting from the Cape of Good Hope and working eastward. The southern winter was to be spent as he judged best. In this new venture, his qualities as seaman and commander stood out even more clearly than before. The conditions were very different from those of coasts and islands. The work now lay in tempestuous seas and high latitudes, among fields and bergs of ice, searching in vain for the elusive southern land. He carried the task through with a thoroughness that never faltered. No gale and no piercing cold deterred him from going wherever the ships could safely sail, and only ice in dense masses turned him back. What his people thought of it we do not fully know. The Forsters told a piteous tale of privations and hardships, and of how little chance they had to exercise their special knowledge amid such seas. Cook was better provided than before, with means to fix the longitude, and the ships carried 4 chronometric timekeepers, yet the proper method of their use was scarcely understood, and the track of the voyage did not allow them to be of much service. Mindful of past success against scurvy, he took all his former anti-scorbutics and redoubled precautions for cleanliness of person and ship. The result was heartening. There was complete freedom from more than the mere symptoms of scurvy. When he returned, he was able to say that no man had died of this disease, nor of any other due to the exposures of the voyage. And so, under cold stars and over iron seas, the work went steadily on. And so, under cold stars and over iron seas, the work went steadily on. Only 4 lives were lost in a voyage that spanned 3 years, 3 to accidents, and 1 to an illness begun before departure. It was a small number in the face of heat, cold, rain, and every hardship of the sea. With steady purpose the expedition pressed on. Leaving the Cape on November 22nd, Cook stood to the south, intent on crossing the latitude where Bouvet was said to have seen land in 1739. Fierce gales pushed him from his course, and the Bouvet Islands remained doubtful upon the charts. They were reported again in 1825 by the Sprightly, yet when Sir James Ross searched in 1840, he found nothing. Soon the ship was among the ice, meeting gales with snow, sleet, and fog, and slowly working eastward for 4 months. At one point they reached 67 degrees south, and elsewhere held to the highest latitude the ice would allow. Yet no land appeared. Cook rejoiced to find that the ice yielded fresh water, and the casks were filled without fear of shortage. His crew, though willing, may not have shared his delight in lingering among such bitter winds. At last, near the longitude of Tasmania, he turned north toward New Zealand. After more than 11,000 miles from the Cape, without a glimpse of shore, the Resolution anchored in Dusky Bay on March 26, 1774. The Adventure was absent, having parted company in thick weather on February 9th. They moved on to Queen Charlotte's Sound at the north end of Middle Island, and there on May 18th the Adventure was found. Captain Furneaux had searched in vain for his consort, then stood for Tasmania and traced the east coast. Captain Furneaux had searched in vain for his consort, then stood for Tasmania and traced the east coast. Strong winds from the east made him wary of standing into what he believed a deep bay, which was in truth the strait, and he sailed for the rendezvous thinking Tasmania and New Holland were one. The ships left New Zealand on June 7, 1773, and made a wide sweep to the south and east before arriving at Tahiti on August 16th. Many of the Adventure crew were afflicted with scurvy, which puzzled Cook, for his own men were free. He credited his strict insistence on wild celery and other herbs in New Zealand, and also the constant care he took to keep the ship clean and sweet below. Though the Adventure had the same remedies, the daily discipline may not have been the same. After a month among Tahiti and the Society Islands, restored by fresh provisions, they sailed for the Friendly Islands, not visited since Tasman's time. They touched at Eoe and Tongatabu, which Tasman had named Middelburg and Amsterdam. On October 7th they left for New Zealand, reached it on the 21st, and spent the days until November 2, striving in vain to enter Cook Strait, as gale followed gale. In one such storm the Adventure again parted company, and did not return. Cook anchored in Queen Charlotte's Sound on November 2nd, and waited until the 25th for his consort, but she did not come. During this quiet, solemn pause, there came certain proof of the cannibal practices of some Maoris, for a few ate human flesh before the visitors on board. Cook was later blamed for allowing the scene, yet with so much dispute in England, he chose to witness the fact, and set the question to rest. Soon a somber proof appeared. The consort Adventure reached Queen Charlotte's Sound after the Resolution had already sailed, and one of her boat crews was set upon by hostile islanders. None returned, and when the search party approached, the shore fell silent as the people slipped away, leaving only sorrowful signs behind. The sea, ever patient, closed over the tale. Cook sailed south on November 25, 1773, and met the ice once more with steady courage. He pressed on as far as safety allowed, his ropes frozen and his sails stiff as plates of metal. He reached latitude 67 degrees south and worked eastward, faithfully seeking land that did not appear. In one place he penetrated to 71 degrees south, till a dense pack blocked the way like a white wall. By the time he drew near the longitude of Tierra del Fuego, he had satisfied himself that no southern continent lay within the Pacific. On February 6, he turned north toward kinder weather and more fruitful latitudes. All this, while there was no scurvy and hardly any sickness, a quiet witness to the careful watch he kept over the health of his people. The first great purpose in the southern Pacific was achieved, yet his sense of duty pointed beyond the easy path home. He judged that to leave the ocean now would show a want of perseverance and judgment. A vast continent might lie far to the south, he had proved, yet there was still room for great islands where no ship had looked. Many known islands were but lightly explored, and their positions uncertain. He felt that remaining longer would benefit navigation and geography, and bring gain to other sciences as well. When he shared his design, the officers concurred with heart and hand. The seamen stayed obedient and alert, and far from wishing the voyage ended, they welcomed the thought of another year at sea. There was little hope of tidings from home or touch with settled ports, for the plan was to cross the Pacific again, seeking islands as far as the Espiritu Santo of Quiros, north of New Zealand, then to face the stormy latitudes once more toward Cape Horn. Perhaps the memory of Tahiti softened the long prospect. So the work went on, though soon after leaving the south he fell ill of a bilious colic, and for a time his life was feared for. He recovered and turned his search toward Davis' discovery of Easter Island, where he examined the great stone figures, colossal and rough-hewn, set like sentinels above the surf. From there he steered to the Marquesas, little known then, where first misunderstandings bred trouble, and a warning shot had to be fired before calm dealings could begin. Peace restored, a brisk trade brought the crew much-needed refreshment, yet markets shift with a breath, and a single pig bought for red feathers from the friendly islands set a new price for all. Soon nothing could be obtained except for those same red feathers, and being scarce, they ended the trade almost as soon as it began. With quiet prudence, he turned once more toward Tahiti. On the way he touched at a few coral atolls among the wide Pomotu chain, low rings of sand and palm cradled by the lagoon. He reached Manavai on April 22nd, his company again all sound and well. 3 weeks passed there with content on every side, the ship at ease, the men restored, and the ocean around as gentle as sleep. Provisions were plentiful, the king and the people very friendly, and all went well. Provisions were plentiful, the king and the people very friendly, and all went well. The islanders were preparing for an attack on Eimeo, a neighboring island, and a gathering of the fleets gave Cook a calm view of their naval strength and manner of war. He noticed that the prosperity of Tahiti seemed higher than on his former visit. After another 3 weeks at Huaheine and Uliati, among old friends, the Resolution sailed on June 4th to the west, drifting on with steady purpose. The crew discovered Palmerston and Savage Islands and called at Namuka of the friendly group, extending the knowledge gained the year before. Thence, They sailed west and sighted Turtle Island, yet passed just south of the large Fiji group, and so missed the chance of adding them to their finds. The course was now set for the New Hebrides, of which the northern island had been discovered by Quiros. Bougainville, the French explorer, had in the year 1768 passed just south of Quiros Island, naming one or two that he sighted. Yet he made no stay and learned little of the group. This was not the fashion of Cook. He explored and circumnavigated the whole chain, which stretches in a long line for 350 miles. He touched first at Malakolo, where after a brief misunderstanding friendship was formed. Passing Sandwich Island, he landed on Eromanga, but the suspicion of the people led them to attack the boats, and no intercourse was established. With measured care, the ship then anchored in the quiet harbor of Resolution Bay in the island of Tanna, and remained a fortnight to wood and water. With measured care, the ship then anchored in the quiet harbor of Resolution Bay in the island of Tanna, and remained a fortnight to wood and water. Observations were made on the hot springs that gush from the side of the volcano bordering the harbor, and relations with the people were altogether friendly. Sighting Anetium, the southern member of the New Hebrides,